Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Stephen Kurczy. Stephen is an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Economist, the Christian Science Monitor, and Vice. And today we will speak about his latest book, The Quiet Zone, Unraveling the Mystery of a Town Suspended in Silence. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Elaine, thank you. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to give a piece of information to my listeners that they will find hard to believe, and that is that it's been 10 years that you don't own or use a cell phone. Could you tell us about how that came about?
Back in 2009, I was living in Cambodia. I had been working for the Cambodia Daily newspaper. And over those 2 years that I was there, I, I had felt increasingly like tethered to this device. I can remember sitting at my reporting desk, waiting for a call back from a source so I could meet my deadline for this article, and like staring at the phone, just willing for it to ring, like praying that I would be able to get that story in on time. And there were many other moments at dinner or going to bed, or when I would just have that phone by me all the time. And I really felt like it was somewhat of an unhealthy addiction that I had to this device. When I left Cambodia, it was also a pretty old smartphone, or sorry, it was a flip phone. When I left Cambodia, I threw it away. I just figured I'll take a break from it. It's not going to work. I'll be traveling around Asia for a couple months. When I get back to the United States, I'll get a new one or whatever. But when I got back to the United States, I was low on cash, and I thought I can just not have a cell phone as a way of saving some money. I don't want to invest in a data plan and everything like that. And then weeks turned into months, turned into years, turned into this ideological refusal, really, to go along with the crowd and with all the societal pressures that are on us, really, to have a smartphone. It's so expected that we'll all always be available to everybody, even if we're out and about having dinner, going on a hike, and everything like that. And I wanted to kind of get away from that, and I also wanted to see if it's possible.
Okay, well, I will share with my audience my experience with a cell phone. So I was telling you, I was managing 5 Airbnb properties, and I was answering messages at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning because I wanted to have this super host status. And when I closed that business, I just stopped the data in my phone. I stopped, all social media. I didn't want to hear one more ping or ring or anything that would distract me. And since then, my phone is just a device that I use to listen to podcasts. And, it's a computer that I have in my pocket, but no communication whatsoever. So anything but a real phone.
And that's such a common story. I think we all have this moment when we just feel so overwhelmed by it. We think I have to throw this away, or I'm just going to delete everything. We want to get away from it all and go to a kind of like quiet zone.
Right. And we will get that to the quiet zone. So can you tell us a little bit more about your journalistic journey? Is that something that you always wanted to do? How did you get into it? And then all the way to the moment where you decide to write this book.
Let's let's burrow in here with coffee and a nice meal. So it's gonna be a long discussion. In college, I read the book The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. I don't know if you've ever read that one. It's set in I think it's set in Newfoundland Island in Canada, and it's about a man who is working for a kind of a rag of a newspaper, and his beat is the shipping news. And in a funny kind of darkly romantic way, this book really made me want to be a journalist, almost like a community journalist who's burrowed in with lots of people and writing about just things that people care about in the community. And I decided from then that I was going to be a journalist. I'd already been freelancing for my high school newspaper and then my college newspaper. And then on the summers, I was writing for a couple of different newspapers back in my home state of Connecticut. So when I graduated, I joined a newspaper in Connecticut, and then I had the chance to be a reporter in New York City for a legal publication. And I had that opportunity to go abroad. I really had this interest to be an international journalist, and I had the chance to go to Cambodia, first as an intern for the Cambodia daily newspaper, and then to join full-time as a staff reporter. Then I came back to the United States. Sorry, were you going to say something?
No. Yes,
Oh,
continue.
came back to the US and joined the Christian Science Monitor, transitioned back to reporting on finance in New York City again, but I still had this itch to be an international journalist. And looking ahead, I saw that Brazil was going to be hosting the 2014 World Cup, the 2016 Olympics, and having a presidential election in the middle of it all. So I, without knowing any Portuguese, I bought a one-way ticket to Brazil and flew down to Rio de Janeiro and essentially became a foreign correspondent based there for the next 3 years. And came back, my transition back to the United States from Brazil was when I was invited to do a journalism fellowship at Columbia University. It's a great journalism fellowship. It's called the Knight Bagehot Fellowship in Business and Economics Journalism. Any journalists out there, I would highly recommend this. You get an opportunity to study at Columbia for a full year for free, and then give you a generous stipend, and you can earn a master's at the end of it if you want to take that track. One of the courses I was able to take was a book writing seminar with a wonderful professor named Samuel G. Friedman. He's written, I think, 9 books of narrative nonfiction, and he has this very esteemed course called the Book Writing Seminar. It's been written up in National Public Radio and in many other publications because he's had something like 100 books come out of this class. I went into the class with this idea of I want to write a book about not having a cell phone. And through that class, it developed into an idea of, well, where do I function? Is there anyone else like me left in this world? Is there any place where somebody without a cell phone really still belongs and can get along like anybody else? And at some point, I just did a simple Google search for places in the US without cell service, and up popped Green Bank, West Virginia, the so-called quietest town in America. And over spring break of that spring semester of 2017, I first went down to Green Bank.
Okay, and can you describe Green Bank? What is it like? You describe when you were in the book, when you were going and searching for hotels, and the hotel where you stay, it so happens to have Wi-Fi. So,
Yeah,
there's a contradiction right there from the start.
absolutely. Yeah. Green Bank is a super remote community in the mountains of Appalachia, of West Virginia and Appalachia. It's in the middle of a county called Pocahontas County, which in itself is a county about the landmass of Rhode Island. It's a pretty big county without a single highway going through it. The grand total is 3 stoplights in the entire county. There's only about 8,200 people, 8,200 people. See, 1 high school, 1 newspaper. There's not a whole lot there, which makes it a great place to do radio astronomy. So in Green Bank is, it's this remote town, a couple hundred people. And in the center of it, as you're driving through, you see these massive radio telescope dishes just popping above the trees. The largest one, it's about 330 feet wide, the actual dish. And just imagine that, like it's also 450 feet tall. It's the tallest structure in West Virginia, and it's also the largest fully steerable radio dish in the entire world. And there it is in one of the most remote places in all of the East Coast of America. So you're driving to Green Bank and you see these telescope dishes. And my first time going there, it was with my girlfriend, Jenna. She's now my wife, and we have a couple of kids together. We were together, we'd just been dating for a little bit. And she knew I didn't have a cell phone, but she didn't quite know what she was signing up for me with all that entailed, especially with the book journey that I was about to go on. And going into Green Bank, we didn't know where we were going to be staying that night. And we had this process where we stopped into the local general store, and the man there behind the register, he said, I don't know where you can stay. There's one place up the road. We go there, it's closed. And he says, oh, well, maybe there's another place you can go to. So we drive 5 miles the other direction. It's also closed. We drive back to the general store for the 3rd time in the same afternoon, increasingly wondering, where are we going to sleep tonight? And that was really a product of not having cell service. Like we couldn't make the calls ahead of time. We couldn't do a simple Google search. We couldn't get on Jenna's cell phone. I don't have a cell phone, but Jenna does. She couldn't get on her cell phone and look for like other options. So we had to keep on interacting with people in person and going back to this hub, which was the one
Yes.
general store, the gas station in town, until finally we spotted the name of one place. It was about 10 miles away. We were able to use the landline register at the gas station. I don't know when the last time I'd used a landline was, to call up this one lodging. It's like a combination greasy spoon restaurant, hair salon, a place where you could buy gun ammunition and knives, and also a 4-room motel. And we get there, and exactly, it turns out that they have Wi-Fi at this place. So right away, there was this contrast and also contradiction between the quietest place in America also having Wi-Fi, and what is the place really about, and what are the actual rules here, and is it as quiet as I've made it out to be.
And you ended up staying in Green Bank for how long?
I was there for about 4 months over about 3 years.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
okay, so you mentioned in the book that, okay, I'm going to ask you about electrosensitive people, who they are, but also there were neo-Nazis group there. And in your book, you mentioned that your fiance or girlfriend at that time, well, she's your wife now, but she's Korean, so she looks different. I wonder how was she received knowing that there is this neo-Nazis group there?
So the neo-Nazi group is about 25 miles south of Green Bank in another one of those remote, pseudo communities, pseudo towns of Pocahontas County. To give you a sense, there's actually only 3 towns in the entire county. Green Bank isn't one of them. Green Bank is an unincorporated community. So the 3 towns are Hillsborough, Marlinton, and Durban. And Green Bank is one of those unincorporated communities, and the neo-Nazis are in another one of them, about 25 miles away. They've been there for about 40 years. It was a very well-known, infamous neo-Nazi leader named William Luther Pierce, who first bought the land back in 1984. It's nearly 400 acres of remote property, forested property on this mountain hillside, where he, for until his death in 2002, was running one of America's foremost neo-Nazi organizations with $1 million in annual sales from books and hate music, and other literature that they published. And for context here, Pierce was the author of a book called The Turner Diaries. It's a fairly infamous novel of racist futurism, which has been credited with having an influence on dozens of acts of hate violence around the world over the past half century. Most notably, it was considered an influential document for Timothy McVeigh and the Waco bombing. Sorry, the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. McVeigh was also influenced by the Waco incident a year prior to the Oklahoma City bombing. They're down there in Mill Point, the neo-Nazis are, and they don't really venture much outside of their compound. They're not as much in the community today as they used to be, but still, for Jenna, being a minority, she was born in Korea and she's lived in the United States the past 20 years or so. She went to college and has worked here for her adult life. There was still a very eerie feeling of, I'm so close to a group of people that doesn't want me to be here in the United States,
right.
and that espouses violence against minorities such as myself because we are in the United States. Right. William Pierce was a proponent of essentially a violent overthrow of the United States government in order to install a pro-white regime. That's basically the plot line of the Turner Diaries. And other people who have followed William Pierce, such as Bob Matthews, who was the leader of a deadly white nationalist gang called the Order back in the late 70s and early 80s. He basically fulfilled this vision, as did a racist serial killer named Joseph Paul Franklin, who roved the country, killing people in interracial relationships, basically Jenna and I, killing people in interracial relationships, as well as Blacks and Jews, just because he wanted to clear the world of these people. 2 of Joseph Paul Franklin's alleged victims were actually in Pocahontas County, not far from the neo-Nazi compound. And that gives you a sense of how nefarious and really ingrained this violence is, both in America, and also its influence on Pocahontas County itself. It wasn't just this group of neo-Nazis who was espousing ideas for other people outside. It had a direct influence on the county of Pocahontas. And for Jenna, that was a frightening thing.
Yes.
As well, William Pierce went to that area because it's predominantly white, and he knew that he would have sympathizers in the community. There's still a strong, you drive around, you'll see Confederate flags, flying from
And
houses.
KKK signs.
That very first visit, when Jen and I went to Green Bank, we stayed at that motel in the town of Durban. We went to a bar that night, and there was a man next to me playing pool, and he had a KKK tattoo on his shoulder. Absolutely, there's still that influence there, which can be, at the very least, unnerving and unsettling for a minority.
So the people in Green Bank, do they migrate to this town searching quiet or isolation from Wi-Fi and all this communication, or are they organic grown there?
Yeah, maybe I can circle back to the last, what I was saying about neo-Nazis and the KKK influence. I don't want to make it seem like everybody there is a neo-Nazi or that everybody there is a white supremacist. It's a small minority of people, and for the most part, they are very welcoming of outsiders, and Jenna herself felt very welcomed into the community. It's just this thing in the back of your mind that you always know is there that becomes unsettling. There's a strong, aside from the, so William Pierce, he went to the Green Bank area, to the quiet zone, because it was quiet. He was looking to get away from it all. He wanted to get away from law enforcement. He wanted to get away from minorities. He wanted to get away from liberal groups that were kind of badgering him back in Washington, D.C. But he's just one of many people and groups who have gone to the quiet zone over the past half century, essentially looking to get away from it all. They've all been attracted to the quiet. The quiet has been a magnetizing force for all these different groups. First, you had the radio astronomers who established their radio astronomy observatory in Green Bank in the late 50s. Around the same time, you had a group of government spies who established a very well-known military headquarters not far away in the town of Sugar Grove. And to this day, the National Security Agency over in Sugar Grove operates its own collection of radio antennas, which are sweeping in a massive amount of telephone calls and emails and messages from around the East Coast of the United States. It's considered one of the largest eavesdropping bugs that the NSA operates in the United States. And it can do its work because it's in a national radio quiet zone. The National Radio Quiet Zone, for context, it's a 13,000 square mile designated area. It's the only quiet zone in all of America. It was the very first in the entire world. It protects both Green Bank and Sugar Grove. It allows Sugar Grove to do its spying and allows Green Bank to do its astronomy work. So first you had the astronomers, then you had the government spies, then you had a massive influx of hippies and back to the landers. Back in the 70s, during the whole back to the land movement, hundreds of them came to Pocahontas County looking to get away from it all, looking to go back to nature. On the tail end of them was a man named Patch Adams. He was a medical physician, most made famous by the 1998 film Patch Adams starring Robin Williams, which was a worldwide blockbuster. At the very end of that movie, it mentions how Patch Adams is building a free rural hospital in Appalachia to serve the people of West Virginia. That's in the quiet zone, about 25 miles south of Green Bank in the county of Pocahontas. So he was attracted there because the land was cheap, it was remote, he could get away from it all, and he could establish this free medical hospital. In reality, the hospital doesn't exist. He's been raising millions and millions of dollars on the promise of building a hospital, which after 4 decades is yet to serve a single person in all of Pocahontas County.
It's
Then
a scam.
Yeah. Certainly people there in Pocahontas County are like, what is happening to the money? Where is this hospital that he's promising? And that's important too, because it's so quiet there, because it's so remote, there really hasn't been a whole lot of scrutiny of Patch Adams and of his organization and what's actually going on there. And I think it's allowed him to continue to thrive, really. He doesn't even live there. He lives in Illinois, but he still survives and thrives on this idea that he does have a hospital in rural West Virginia. Patch Adams came, then the neo-Nazis came about 5 years after that. most recent group to arrive to the quiet zone, seeking to get away from it all, really trying to get a piece of that quiet, are a group of people called, they have a disease called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. It's by the acronym EHS, and they're more colloquially known as the electrosensitives. And they believe they're physically harmed to the point of death by Wi-Fi, by cell signals, just by the mere presence of a smartphone, which is radiating radio signals. It could be a cell tower, a microwave, a refrigerator, a certain kind of oven. Basically, any kind of modern technology causes them pain. And for them, they believe that the quiet zone in Green Bank is perhaps their last refuge in the world.
And as far as you know, is this electrosensitive, is this real, or is this an imaginary sickness?
It's real in their minds, and they are
Okay.
absolutely, and they're absolutely convinced. And I had quite a few heated discussions with them over my doubts. So it's not recognized by the World Health Organization or the American Medical Association. A couple of countries around the world, I believe it's Sweden and maybe one other country in Europe, have recognized it as a medical condition. So there are quite a few doctors around the world who do believe that it's a real thing, and do believe that they have found research showing that there is this electromagnetic hypersensitivity. I think the whole EHS discussion often gets muddled by two separate issues. One issue is, are cell phones and modern technology, the pervasiveness of it, is it good for us? I think there's lots of research saying, no, it's not good for us, that we do need to break from our devices, that there are psychological impacts from being overwhelmed by this stuff all the time, which is why you yourself, Elaine, wanted to take a break after you felt so overwhelmed by it. You know, there are car crashes. There's been a surge in car accidents, and that's been credited to smartphones. People are having sex less, they're sleeping less, they're having more difficulty having personal connections, relationships with other people, and that's all credited to smartphones. There's a lot of research by Nicholas Carr, Sherry Turkle, Jean Twenge, many people who are really focused on this idea of how our smartphones impacting us psychologically and the negative effects of that. That's one issue. The other side of that, which the sensitives believe, is that they can physically sense a radio signal. Wow. So when you walk into the room, and if you have a smartphone on you, they could physically sense that. They would feel that pain right away. Or when a satellite might be orbiting overhead, they could physically sense that. I spoke a number of times with one woman. Her name is Sue Howard. She's a character in the book. And I remember I have an iPod, which I use like you for your device. I use it for podcasts and for music, and also for recording all my interviews. And I was recording our interview. We were sitting outside. We could see the Green Bank telescope kind of popping up the trees about a mile away. And we're sitting on her porch. And I had my iPod recording our interview. And as we're speaking, she says, "Ooh, look at that. My vein just popped." And she told me to look at her leg, and she believed that her vein had actually physically like pulsated and popped out because of the presence of my iPod. I couldn't really tell a difference, but in her mind, my iPod had physically caused that harm. And It's gotten to the point in Green Bank where the electrosensitives have become kind of like radio monitors of the community. So it's supposed to be a quiet zone so that the observatory can do its radio astronomy, and the electrosensitives, for their own health, want it to remain as quiet as possible. And so when they find evidence, when they feel bothered by what they believe is radio noise, renegade radio noise, be it from a Wi-Fi router or an iPod or smartphones or an arcing electric line, they have been known to contact the observatory and said, "Hey, there's some illegal radio noise. Can you check it out, both for the good of radio astronomy and for our own health?"
And there's a fine of how much?
So in 1956, the West Virginia legislature passed a law which established a radio astronomy zoning act around any radio astronomy facility in the state of West Virginia. The only one that exists is in Green Bank. And within a 10-mile radius, rule breakers who emit radio frequencies that are interfering with the telescopes, they are subject to a $50 daily fine. So there's a threat of having, being fined $50 a day if you've got a Wi-Fi router or other stuff.
Okay, so many of these people, many of the inhabitants of these towns go there because, or they like the quiet zone. But what about the younger generations? I mean, the stereotypical teenage girl who cannot get off their cell phone. How uh, are they happy, or are they cheating, or what's the status of there's always some resistance no matter what the policy is?
Absolutely. I'll give you two examples. When I first went to the Green Bank Elementary School, I met an 8th grader named David Bond. The Green Bank Elementary School, it abuts the Green Bank Observatory. You walk outside the back door and the Green Bank telescope is there. It's like almost looming over the soccer fields. And David Bond, he was telling me about how he loves to hunt. He loves the area's nature. He had something like 12 guns, and he was showing me videos on his iPhone of him shooting these guns and telling me how he'd shot a bear and a deer and all these other animals. But he has an iPhone, and he also has an Xbox. And to upgrade his Xbox, he has to travel a full hour to a gas station called Sheets, where he can download his updates to his Xbox. He would love to be able to do that at home, but his wired internet isn't fast enough. He would love to have cell service on his iPhone, but of course he can't because cell service is illegal in Green Bank and in that center of the quiet zone. And for him, it's enough that he doesn't want to live there anymore. He's looking forward to when he can leave, just so that he can be in an area where he can have fast internet and where he can have cell service.
Right.
A little asterisk: the internet is very slow there. That's not because of the quiet zone. Slow internet is a problem across rural America, and it's more a product of it being a remote area where companies just haven't invested in the infrastructure to have fast internet. So you can have internet, you can have fast wired internet in the quiet zone, and in Pocahontas County, it's the cell service that you can't have. I met another student, a high schooler named Matthias Soliday, and when I first met him, he had no cell phone. He was quite content with the idea of living in Green Bank and living in a quiet zone. He said he liked it there. He said he appreciated the chance just to interact more with people in person. And he gave me examples of how community in his determination was a bit tighter because of that. He mentioned how, sometimes he'd be driving to school and he'd pass a neighbor's cow pasture, and if the cows had gotten out and were in the roads, he would just kind of shoo them back in, kind of prop the fence back together, and then when he got back onto a phone, he would call the farmer and say, "Hey, we put your cows back in the pasture." Because he knew that he didn't have cell service, he couldn't call for help. He couldn't call the farmer to take care of himself. Like, he took on that responsibility himself to take care of it. It's an example of how people there are perhaps more willing to help each other and just take the initiative for helping because they know that they can't call for cell service. Matthias Soliday didn't have a cell phone when I first met him, but by his senior year of high school, he had gotten an iPhone. So you can tell even there, with somebody who likes the quiet, even he feels that need to get a little bit more connected, to be able to use his cell phone when he is in towns that might have cell service in the surrounding area, or when he is in places that might have Wi-Fi.
Is there any signs that the Green Bank Observatory may not be in business sometime in the future? And thus the whole premise for having a quiet zone may disappear?
The Green Bank Observatory's major patron over the past half century was a very famous politician named Robert C. Byrd. He was the longest serving senator in US history, and he was able to funnel quite a few $1 million into Green Bank. And as long as Byrd was alive, Green Bank had just a powerful patron in Washington that was looking out for it. Senator Byrd died in 2011, I believe it was, and the very following year, the National Science Foundation, coincidentally or not, announced that it was going to be conducting a review of whether or not it was going to continue funding the observatory at all. Nobody in the Green Bank believes that would have happened if Robert Byrd was still alive. he wouldn't have let that happen,
Right.
because he was for quite a while he controlled the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, meaning that he controlled the purse strings of the U.S. government. The NSF announced its review in 2012, 2013, and since then has been cutting back funds to the Green Bank Observatory, to the point where the observatory is wondering, will there be a point when the NSF says we're not going to fund you any longer? It's already gotten to the level where Green Bank is supplementing its budgetary needs by outsourcing the Green Bank telescope to private groups. I think a full 1/3 of its funding is coming from outside groups, and a large portion of that is from, it's called the SETI initiative. SETI stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It's funded by a Russian billionaire named Yuri Milner, who is doing a massive scan of all the stars and other galaxies in the universe, looking for extraterrestrial life. So a large amount of the Green Bank telescope's funding and the ability for the Green Bank Observatory to continue surviving is thanks to this search for extraterrestrial intelligence that's happening there in Green Bank. There's another reason, though, aside from that alien research funding, for why I think Green Bank will continue to exist and why the quiet zone won't be disappearing soon. And that's because of Sugar Grove. Sugar Grove relies on the quiet zone to do its work. And Sugar Grove appreciates the fact that the public face of the quiet zone is the Green Bank Observatory. When you think of the quiet zone, for people who are familiar with it, you think of astronomy. And when you have to go through any kind of bureaucratic barriers to install cell service or radio, or if you want to install any of that stuff within the 13,000 square mile zone, you have to go through the Green Bank Observatory through a woman named Paulette Woody, who's the administrator of the quiet zone. She's also known colloquially as the queen of the quiet zone because she oversees it all. And she oversees it on behalf of both the observatory and Sugar Grove. She oversees all of those installations, and she determines whether or not they'll interfere with the observatory's telescopes and Sugar Grove's spy antennas. So the observatory plays an integral role in protecting the quiet zone, both for the astronomy work and for the government spy operations.
Is this the okay? I wonder how much longer the quiet zone will endure. I also wonder if this is the only place in America where there is a quiet zone, and if this is something that other people will look for as we get more inundated by signals, and there is a lot of pushback against 5G signals. There are people vandalizing the 5G antennas as well. So there are a lot of people who are not happy with all these signals, and maybe they will all go to Green Bank, but maybe they will also go to some other areas of the country.
Yeah. So Green Bank and the National Radio Quiet Zone, it is the only federal quiet zone, radio quiet zone in the United States. There's one other much smaller quiet zone of sorts, which is just outside of, I think it's Boulder, Colorado, but it's so small that it doesn't have nearly the same quietude or protections, and it also doesn't have a community. It's like set on a plateau outside of town where there's just this one science building and some antennas. Whereas Green Bank is an actual thriving community. There's a couple of general stores in the area, there's a post office, there's people, there's churches. You can live a life there that you can't live in other super radio quiet places of the world. You can't really live on the North Pole, the South Pole, Sahara, the Himalaya. It's just too harsh an environment. Green Bank is attractive to people with electrosensitivity as well as to astronomers because you can live a nice life there. You can live a comfortable life there, and you can be a part of a really wonderful community where you can play music in the local, Appalachian folk band, and you can, participate in the local recreation leagues and have kids going to the local schools. You can't do that in the middle of the Sahara Desert, which might have a radio quiet pocket in it.
Right.
Will people continue to go there? I think there's a growing recognition that quiet is growingly scarce and therefore increasingly valuable. And I think that attention on Green Bank is giving more impetus to protect it. More and more people are saying we need to do things that will enforce the quiet and that will keep this a quiet area. more people are stepping up, even private donors, to say, here's money for the observatory. I want you to continue to operate, mainly for the radio astronomy, but also because they want to have a quiet zone where they can do that radio astronomy. The growing number of electrosensitives who are coming there, that's also a growing grassroots groundswell of support for the quiet zone. And they're very vocal. Some of the electrosensitives, a woman named Diane Scow is a very notable one. She's written numerous letters to the FCC, to the President of the United States of America, to many politicians saying, I have this disease, this is where I am, we have to protect this place. Wow. And many of the other electrosensitives have also become vocal supporters and patrons of the quiet zone. But there are all kinds of threats to it continuing to survive. One of the more insidious threats now that is really hard to do anything about are overhead satellites. And a new major satellite communications proposal is for global Wi-Fi. Amazon and Virgin and Google are all, and SpaceX, they're all getting into this idea of launching hundreds, if not thousands of satellites into space, orbiting Earth, that would be beaming down Wi-Fi. The National Radio Quiet Zone has rules to protect it, but those rules only apply to ground-based fixed transmitters. It can't do anything about overhead satellite communications. And the Green Bank Observatory and the National Radio Astronomy Observatory has been lobbying to prevent those satellites from going over the Green Bank area and, you know, keeping that a quiet place. But it's an ongoing discussion. Wow. And it's unclear who's going to win. Well,
it's an amazing part of our world that to have this oasis of silence. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow you?
Yeah, so the title of the book is The Quiet Zone, Unraveling the Mystery of a Town Suspended in Silence. I'm the author, Stephen Kurczy. I have a website. It's www.stephenkurczy.com. My last name is Kurczy. I'm also on Twitter at Stephen Kurczy. And I'd love to hear from everybody about your feelings about this issue, about the feelings that you have about being overwhelmed by your cell phones and wanting to take a break from it sometimes. And maybe also your thoughts on if you think that we should do all we can to protect this quiet zone, if not for the sake of radio astronomy, but for the sake of anybody who wants to get away from this pervasive connectivity.
Well, I will put all those links in the show notes, plus pictures of the observatory. I went to Google Photos and I saw amazing photos. So, Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Elaine. It was fun.